DeAndre Hopkins is joining forces with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. We also got Evan Engram serving as Sean Payton's newfound Joker in Denver. Kenneth Gainwell of the Steelers, all that and so much more coming up on the Fantasy Live Show. That's right, another round of free agency instant reactions. Always a great day to be great when we're breaking down free agency. Again, this is the Fantasy Life Free Agency Instant Reaction Show presented by the fine folks over at DraftKings. Ian Hartitz and none other than Dwain, the Rock McFarland coming at you. And Dwain, big name wide receiver taken off the board in free agency. Now, maybe the stats haven't been quite as monstrous in recent years, but when DeAndre Hopkins signs somewhere, we have to listen. Initial thoughts on, again, the fit overall in Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it does much for the Ravens. Like we had hoped last year for the Chiefs that it would equal more for DeAndre Hopkins. Now you can say that the guy had a partially torn MCL in the preseason. So how much of that lingered through last year? He toughed it out, tried to play through that. Obviously the Titans moved him on to the Chiefs, but looking at his role, it actually just got less and less over the course of the season as the Chiefs got Hollywood Brown back, as they better integrated Xavier Worthy into their offense. The guy they really eliminated, Ian, in the playoffs was DeAndre Hopkins. He had 41, 31, and 36% route participations when the Chiefs needed him most, and with their passing game still struggling. So it just makes you wonder, how much do we really think that Hopkins has left in the tank? He's a guy, obviously, we both love. You've had him on your teams in the past, and he's helped you win fantasy championships. So one of the best wide receivers of the last 10 to 15 years, no doubt about it. But at this point, going to be 33 years old. And then again, we're going to the Ravens, a team that likes to run the ball plenty. I feel like we've seen this before, right? With Odell Beckham Jr., some of these other veterans. Doesn't usually amount to much. I think from a positive standpoint, he probably is not going to be enough to really take away from Zay Flowers. We'll see what happens with Mark Andrews. I know some rumors about him potentially being moved, but I feel like the offense pretty much stays the same. And he's just a piece that they insert and use from time to time. Maybe they use him in the red zone, things like that. But I don't think it's going to be someone we're going to want in fantasy football.
Baltimore really joining the Titans now, I would say, as the two teams where formerly great wide receivers kind of go to last for their final, year or two in the league. And ironically, now Hopkins has spent time with both organizations. But I will say, just a 1 year, $6 million deal. In the year 2025, we're seeing Tutu Atwell and Diami Brown making over $10 million. So not like the Ravens really had to break the bank for the guy. I'm with you, Dwayne. I don't see much fantasy relevance here overall. But at the same time, we live in a world where earlier this year in the Ravens' very last game against the Bills, we saw Tyler Wallace, Nelson Aguilar, and Anthony Miller combined for 63 snaps for that Ravens offense. Now, that was with Zay Flowers sideline, but again, I think the trade to get Deontay Johnson and then actually bringing him back another time last year reflected the reality that Baltimore has been looking for that third banana, someone who can win maybe a bit more in the red zone, can work across the intermediate areas of the field, let Rashad Bateman be your field stretching wide receiver, and let Zay Flowers do more of your human joystick underneath design yak stuff underneath. So I'm with you. Not exactly, a needle mover in fantasy land, but from a real life fit, I do feel like this was a decent move that made the Ravens a little bit better, which again, not saying they're all of a sudden Super Bowl favorites, but I think we've seen worse deals out there to kind of polish off your three wide receiver sets.
Yeah, and look, it's still DeAndre Hopkins. So there's some things that he's going to be able to do. And I agree with you. He's just a small piece they're adding, whether it's the red zone, intermediate stuff that you talked about. Like he's still a guy that can win the tough contested catches. We saw Mahomes going to him once he got down into the green zone, if you will, back of the end zone throws. So he's a guy that can still do those things. He just moves probably more like a tight end than a wide receiver at this point in his career. So he's a guy you want to slide into the slot, do some different things like that. But one-on-one matchups, whenever it really counts and you're trying to, get that first down or get a touchdown, I do think he can help them in specific spots. Again, like you mentioned, not someone we're going to use in fantasy.
Surprised to actually see that he finished last year 20th in ESPN's open score metric, helped, which is meant to help quantify separation, was actually 5th with the Titans there in 2023. However, some, more traditional advanced metrics, if you will, yards per route run, targets per route run, just 44th and 37. So I do not think Hopkins is completely washed. Now, relative to his previous all-pro self, certainly a shell of that version. But again, I still think there might be, something like an average wide receiver there in Baltimore. Dwayne, would any of your your opinions here change, though, if we do see the Ravens move on from Mark Andrews? Because as much as I do believe in Isaiah Likely behind Andrews, if we're seeing him, promoted up, that would be a situation where, you have Andrews almost working more in that Travis Kelce mold where they are able to sit in those zones, provide that open target. If you subtract Andrews from the equation, not saying I'm, all of a sudden freaking out about DeAndre Hopkins, but it make a little bit more sense, I think, if that is going to be an upcoming move as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, we'd be the most excited about Likely, right? That would put him probably in the top 10 to top 8 tight ends. DeAndre Hopkins, he would get a small bump, certainly. You take one of the, bigger mouths that you're trying to feed in the offense away. But again, not someone we're going to get excited about. It would probably be a situation where, okay, at least we're going to monitor DeAndre Hopkins now. We're going to see how he starts the year. Maybe we put him on the waiver wire speed dial, a guy that we might pick up for a bye week, that sort of thing. Still wouldn't be drafting him, but to your point, like it would open up more opportunity.
I personally did not adjust my ranks for Zay Flowers or Rashad Bateman. Still feeling about, good about their original projections. Lamar Jackson was already my QB1, so guess what? Adding Hopkins, not going to change that. However, we do have some ranks to be adjusting with the Denver Broncos because they have finally gotten Sean Payton his joker. That's right, ex-Giants and Jaguars tight end Evan Engram come on down. It's a 2-year deal worth $23 million with $16.5 million guaranteed for Mr. Engram. Not exactly a spring chicken these days, Dwain. He will be turning 31 in September, but hey, last 3 years in Jacksonville wound up working as the tight end 8 in terms of PPR points per game. So again, we've kind of been matching guys like Colson Loveland, maybe Tylen Warren to the Denver Broncos in the draft. Now we probably have to be redoing some of those mocks because Evan Engram sitting pretty as the tight end 1s. Overall thoughts and what you think maybe his ceiling here is in Denver?
Yeah, I think with Engram, this is a really nice landing spot. It will be interesting because historically, the way we have actually seen Sean Payton use his tight ends has been really in combination with the running backs, right? Where you're really running the tight end down the seam, some of the deeper concepts against the linebackers. Then you have a receiving running back coming underneath. Back in the day, it was Darren Sproles. Obviously, Alvin Kamara fit that role. They don't necessarily have a guy of that, nature, but they have guys that, they put on the field that can do some of those things. So it'll be interesting because Evan Engram, he was really more of an underneath target, especially as he's aged a little bit. In Jacksonville over the last 3 seasons, Ian, we've had average depths of target ADOT of 6.4, 5.0, and 5.8. He did have some higher than that early in his career. Rookie season was a 9 with the Giants, but still overall has been more of a guy that you put underneath, let him use some of that speed and athleticism on drag routes, crossing routes, things like that, run away from linebackers and man coverage, understands how to sit down end zone. So I will be interested to see what Sean Payton does with him. The other thing that we'll have to factor in is that Engram really had a good run out with Jacksonville. I mean, we're talking about a guy that pretty much was on the field all the time from a route participation standpoint in the games that he was available. Sean Payton is someone that we've seen likes to use multiple tight ends. Even when you go back to the days with Jimmy Graham, he would have snap shares in 65, 75%. Now his route participation will be a little bit higher than that. So we'll have to monitor that. It'll be interesting to see what Sean Payton decides to do. But I do think he's an athletic guy that can be a mismatch. It'll be interesting to see, do they use him the way they've been using him in Jacksonville, or they try to ask him to do some different things that really fit more with what Sean Payton has done in the past. If they do the second thing, I think it creates some questions around, well, can Evan Engram do that? Maybe he can, maybe he can't. I don't know. You would have thought coming out of college with his profile, he would have already been used more like that over the course of his career. So if we knew that he was going to have a role more like Jacksonville, obviously there's room here. You just have Cortland Sutton. You got Marvin Mims, who played really good at the end of the year, but they're not giving him a full-time role. So you could have a situation where really Cortland Sutton's the first read on most plays and Evan Ingram's the second, with a guy in Bo Nix that we both really like, an ascending young talent. I think that could be really good for Evan Engram.
Again, you can kind of paint the scenario here where things could work out, but we've been trying to do this for a while, in the post-Jimmy Graham era, if you will. We had the Kobe Fleener years where he got a bunch of money and couldn't quite, find that full-time role with the Saints. We had a 3rd-round pick used on Adam Troutman, who actually had, nice receiving numbers with the Dayton Flyers. Shout out Ohio, doing his thing there. Juwan Johnson never quite worked out. And then even getting to Denver at this point, Greg Dulcich and, Troutman again, never could exactly put up big numbers. And honestly, tight ends in Denver over these past 2 years have been used less than any other group in the league, and it's not even close. Dead last in overall targets, Denver tight ends are these last 2 years, and it's by a whopping 37 total targets, Dwain. So again, when you don't have, someone like Evan Engram, I understand it, but we are asking them to make a pretty big jump in terms of their philosophy. So the hope, though, is that Ingram's going to be more or less a big slot. Now, he's not Mike Gesicki level of, a wide receiver. He can't put his hand in the ground and be, more of your traditional inline tight end, but did spend more total snaps in the slot or out wide. And again, when Courtland Sutton is really your only other, main competition, with all due respect to Marvin Mims, you can start to paint the picture for triple-digit targets. So I don't think this signing necessarily means the Broncos are completely out of, maybe using that 20th, I believe, overall pick on someone like a Colston Loveland, but hey, could also be a wide receiver, which again wouldn't be ideal as well. So as things stand right now, Dwain, let's try to assume that there's not going to be any more major, slot receivers or tight ends added to the Broncos. So we're pretty confident this is going to be Ingram's job. Where do you kind of think he lands in our way too early 2025 ranks? Because at tight end, pretty clear, top 5 at this point. I mean, we got Bowers, McBride, George Kittle, Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson. I think you're going to see those guys in more people's ranks than not in that order. After that, though, it gets interesting. You got your Kelseys, your Andrews of the world, your Njokus, your Goddards, your Jonnu Smiths, where, again, if Ingram has a good run out, you can make that argument that he arguably could lead that group.
Yeah, I mean, he's in that tier, and we create tiers for a reason, because there's really a lot of ways a different guy could lead the group. There's also a lot of ways a different player could end up at the bottom of the group. And really, Ingram fits exactly into that mold. We know that he's a player that's been productive in the past, much like the other guys you're talking about in the tier. But we do have some questions here. What's the playing time going to look like? How well is he going to fit into Sean Payton's scheme? Overall, I lean into the fact that Evan Engram has been a really good tight end for fantasy football over the last 3 years. That's still the thing we care about. But we have shown in studies that we've done over at Fantasy Life, whenever players change teams, right, they do lose some of that signal because of what we're talking about, the unknown. Are they going to fit in their new environment? So it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. It's something that certainly we'll be wanting to monitor in training camp and preseason, all that sort of stuff. But right now, I think you've got him in the right group. I wouldn't really argue with anyone if they said they wanted to put him at the top of that, or if they wanted to put him at the bottom. I'll see where I land. I just started working on my way too early ranks just before the show. I've only gotten through 50 players or so, though, so I have not reached Evan Ingram's name yet.
Wow, a little sneak preview for all you guys out there. We will have all those ranks updated on fantasylife.com here by the end of the week. Again, Engram really was the crown jewel of this tight end class, and that came to fruition late, obviously, with the Jaguars letting go of him, trading Christian Kirk, and really clearing house here, within the last week. Now, when you look at the landscape, I mean, Tyler Conklin is probably the biggest name. My guy Gerald Everett's still out there. Mo Alley Cox. I mean, Harrison Bryant, former Mackey winner, shout out to Evan Silva and everything. But it really does seem like at this point, there's Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren if you want to use a first-round pick on them. And there's maybe, again, Mark Andrews who you could trade for. Would love to see either Loveland or Andrews, going to the Chargers. It does seem like, obviously, Loveland and Harbaugh have that connection. And then with Andrews, going back to his days with Greg Roman in Baltimore, you can get behind that. But that's really the last place, Dwayne, where, again, if you're trying to figure out where someone could go, like an Andrews, or where to maybe mock one of these first-round tight ends and hope for the production, it does seem like Los Angeles. I know some people tried to have Tyler Warren going to the Colts, and I get it. I think Tyler Warren would make any offense in the NFL better, but I don't want a tight end having to deal with catching passes from Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson. At this point, it really does seem like Chargers or bust.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it's Chargers or bust. I think you're definitely naming the top team, though, right? If you're looking for that clear path to where we know you're going to get the playing time, and we only have one other real target earner, and you've got the quarterback in place. So once you put all those criteria into place, which that really narrows things down for us, I do agree that the Chargers would be the best landing spot. I do think that we're talking about two tight ends that are really good. They're not on the level of Brock Bowers, but these are two good prospects. We also have Harold Fannin Jr. He might be more of a guy that can't get on the field, though, as far as in blocking situations, kind of similar to what we're talking about with Evan Engram. So he's another tier below. But yeah, I do agree that the Chargers are the absolute best landing spot for one of these guys. And it's the spot where we would be the most excited, and we would probably be trying to figure out who's going to rank that player higher than each other in our own ranks.
Again, Engram, really the biggest news from a relatively quiet, official start to free agency on Wednesday, because Lord knows nothing was going on before today. But there was some other news that went on, I believe, last evening, Dwain. That was former Eagles backup RB Kenneth Gainwell signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just a one-year deal, and we haven't gotten the dollar amount yet. Usually a good indication that it's not going to be too much money. Probably just a veteran minimum for what he has, in terms of years accrued at this point in time. But given that there's no more Najee Harris in Pittsburgh, we could be a few weeks away, or I should say, a month or two away, Dwain, from looking at this depth chart and saying, okay, Jaylen Warren's at the top, but then Kenneth Gainwell, maybe the guy next in line for snaps. And hey, as we discussed with, Najee and Jaylen Warren, Arthur Smith certainly has been someone, willing to keep multiple running backs involved over the years.
Yeah, and I mean, the big thing here isn't so much like what do we think of Gainwell, to your point. It's more, we just talked about Jaylen Warren on yesterday's show and how excited we were for him. And the big key for Jaylen Warren that we talked about that could lead to superstardom in fantasy football is the fact that he can play all of the downs, and he's very good on passing downs. And that can especially add up in those PPR, half PPR formats. Well, Gainwell getting added does add a little bit of a wrinkle, because we are talking about a player that even last year, Ian, took 42% of the 2-minute offense away from a guy named Saquon Barkley. So Gainwell, he was a guy coming out of college that had a really good receiving profile. So in his early days in the NFL, we've also seen some solid numbers as far as just targets per route run, yards per route run, and just the fact that the Eagles have been willing to use him on those passing downs. So it just adds a little bit of a doubt with Warren. And then when you pair it with the dirty words that you said, I can't believe you said the two dirty words, Arthur Smith, and how much he likes to tinker around with these backfields. Look, normally a lot of places Gainwell might land. Look, Gainwell's a good enough passing down back. We'd have to talk about it anywhere. But when you pair it also with Arthur Smith, who we know is willing to use 3 or 4 dudes, it caught my attention. It caught my attention more than it normally would. So I'm not bailing on Jaylen Warren, but I was trying to figure out how to get him in my top 50 that I was working on earlier, and I couldn't get him there now. I think you had him right around the line of 50, because I was looking at yours and Freeman's rankings as well, and I was like, I just can't quite do it. And I know Gainwell, maybe that's stupid to let that be enough to keep me from getting there, but it was just enough that I kept him outside the top 50 in the first run of the ranks. I mean, and who knows, man, if they had another guy in the draft in a deep class, and you have Gainwell, and you have, we also have CPAT there, Ian, so I'm not trying to get ahead of myself. It just starts to become problematic.
So I'm curious, how would you have felt if they had brought in more of a different skill set, an A.J. Dillon or a Nick Chubb type of running back? Because, again, seems like Gainwell did not get any sort of, meaningful financial investment here. And I agree with you, there is an overlapping skill set you could argue with Warren. But I almost think that Gainwell, you could argue, given that Warren's been tendered at a second-round level, is being put in place more so as a pure backup as opposed to someone who's going to be taking away those early down snaps from Warren, which you would think would be, the bigger issue. So really, Gainwell, more impactful than if they brought in more of a direct Najee replacement?
I mean, look, the money does matter, to your point, but if they would have signed A.J. Dillon to the same contract as Kenneth Gainwell, I would have been less worried. I've just seen A.J. Dillon not be good at anything. Early downs, passing downs. He's really good at blowing up mascots. If you guys have seen the video, producer Swing had us watching that before we started the show, and I was definitely laughing at that. So A.J. Dillon can definitely hang in there with a mascot, but Kenneth Gainwell is actually just shown to be a good player on passing downs. And when you're good enough to keep Saquon Barkley off the field, it's something he's also good at, then I do think that that's something that you have to take note of. And there's really only so many guys in the league that teams really trust in those situations. So I would say it's a little bit more hurtful. Again, trying to make this an exact science, we would be lying. It could have gone the other way, where A.J. Dillon would be a worse, backfield partner to have, with Jaylen Warren. But I just think about the complete profile of Warren, and man, the thing I get the most excited about, he's got big playability, but the chance for him to really, cook in the passing game, and this could eat into that.
Currently have Warren as my way too early RB22, just behind guys like David Montgomery, James Conner, and yes, Najee Harris himself. Still ahead of, though, Brian Robinson, Aaron Jones, and Ramondre Stevenson. Again, could not kick him out of the top 24 despite the presence of Gainwell. I will say it's funny, and we see this across the league, but this is another example where if you did watch that Steelers-Eagles game last year, I mean, we saw Gainwell have 2 of his better players of the entire season, taking some of these short dump-offs, breaking multiple tackles, and again, ripping off some explosive plays. So I wonder how much of the signing was simply Mike Tomlin and guys being like, man, that number 14 from the Eagles, we should try to find a way to get him in town. But don't want to discount Gainwell potentially, making some, I guess, money and just usage for himself. Obviously was never expected to, surpass either Miles Sanders or Saquon Barkley on the depth chart. Still found a way to get a good amount of touches though. And again, Dwain, really this Memphis pipeline of running backs over the years has been hilariously, pretty freaky. I mean, from Antonio Gibson to Darrell Henderson to Tony Pollard to Kenneth Gainwell. I understand none of those guys, with the exception of Pollard a little bit, have exactly broken out and had these monster years or anything. But, it's just these like running back, receiver hybrids, have a lot of juice and can catch the football out of the backfield. So I'm intrigued because if it does end up being just Warren and Gainwell, it's not like he's a scat back who can't, potentially handle a bigger role. 63rd percentile BMI. I mean, he's 5'8", 200 pounds, man. Like, I'm excited to see potentially Gainwell get some more touches. I just, kind of wish they weren't going to come at the expense of Jalen Warren.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I like both running backs, actually. Kenneth Gainwell is a guy, when I look back at the rookie supermodel, he graded higher than what his NFL draft capital showed. Now, the supermodel is geared to fantasy football, and it cares a lot about receptions, right? So it's constantly, that's the thing that it's looking for that helps differentiate it versus NFL draft capital. And you're right. Those guys out of Memphis, they all were players that graded higher in the model than what the NFL draft capital said. So it will be interesting to see what the splits look like. I am with you. I lean more to Jalen Warren, still getting most of the work, but I just call it out because it is the Arthur Smith factor as well. So it's and I'm with you. I don't see him being outside my top 24 running backs. I still think he's going to be in them. Now, if they add another running back in the draft, you talked about it yesterday. They don't have all the picks. They don't have necessarily all the bullets they need to be able to go spend another pick or to spend more resources on a running back. If you can avoid that, I think that Warren stays inside our top 24. But if they do add a running back on day 2, they do have their third rounder, if I remember correctly. If they were to do that, like obviously, I think we would have to react and move Jalen Warren down the ranks.
Certainly would make things tougher. And, just one final note here. I saw a pretty funny tweet from some Steelers fan basically saying like, hey, we got Warren and Gainwell now. At least we don't have a running back who looks like they're running in wet, soggy jeans all the time. So, hey, I've been defending Najee Harris on more shows than not recently. So those are not my words here, but pretty funny stuff from us Steelers Nation regardless. So hope you guys again are enjoying the Fantasy Life Free Agency Instant Reaction Show presented by DraftKings. We got a lot more to talk about, guys. But first, a quick word to those very friends over at DraftKings. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, and with all the new ways to get in on the action with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. From Monster Slams to Dishing the Rock to Cleaning the Glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Here's something special for first timers. New DraftKings customers bet just $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using promo code Fantasy Life. The crown is yours. All right, Dwain, we've been talking about, again, mostly just the fantasy relevant players, the quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. But there have been a couple instances where the big uglies up front, those ever important offensive lines, have had a bit of a makeover. So I wanted to spend some time talking about, one of those makeovers that have gone well. And one of them, maybe a bit more of a botched situation, which is maybe causing us to get, less excited about the involved playmakers that we'll be drafting here come August. First off, though, with the glass half full offensive line, it's the Chicago Bears. Congrats, guys. Back to back off-season champions. It is your Chicago Bears sitting here once again. But in all seriousness, man, I mean, they entered like last week. I just checked my, Team Needs Chicago Bears article, and they were dead last in offensive line spending coming into free agency. $20-$25. Right now, they're 5th in the entire NFL. I mean, they have shut out a lot of money, and for good reason. This was a terrible group last year. I understand Caleb Williams took a lot of those sacks, and he needs to figure that out as well. But PFF even, assigns credit, or I should say responsibility, for who was at fault with those sacks, and even removing the ones that Caleb Williams messed up on, the Bears still led the league. So they've gone ahead and traded for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney from the Rams and Chiefs, respectively. Thuney was actually PFF's 7th-ranked guard last season and lost Los Angeles. Jackson battled some injuries, but back in the day in Detroit, did register a Pro Bowl nod under Ben Johnson. We also got the top center on the market in Drew Dahlman, PFF's reigning 5th-ranked center. And honestly, just in terms of PFF grades, their existing tackles in Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright were already their highest graded linemen. So, hey, this was, again, the clear big hole that the Bears needed to fix. And just literally 3 days in the free agency, Dwayne, I think we can say he did a pretty good job doing so.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a key, though. I mean, Caleb Williams definitely still has to improve. If you look at the percentage of sacks that he owned, it was a large amount. So he's going to have to be willing to take the earlier read in the progression or take the hot read, all those sort of things. We know that Caleb Williams can make the absolute big throws, but he needs to be able to take the throws that can help keep the offense on schedule and keep you out of long down and distance situations where the defense can pin its ears back. They can use some of their more exotic looks. They can man you up and just send the extra blitzer or two. Those are situations that Caleb continually put the offense in. Now, hopefully, hypothetically speaking, getting Ben Johnson there as your play caller, thinking about those designs, him being in Caleb's ear is going to take care of that part, right? We're going to get the coaching. And he's also been on the record, Johnson, saying that, look, you don't want to totally take that away from Caleb Williams. That's the thing that makes Caleb a potential guy that could turn into a Josh Allen, turn into a Patrick Mahomes and take it to the next level. So he doesn't want to take that away. He just wants to rein it in a little bit. And I do think this is the next step of that, is improving the offensive line. And because you know how it can go, sometimes it just goes in your head, right? If you've been pressured multiple times in a row and then all of a sudden maybe you're not pressured on the next play, but you're already freaking out and you spin out, you take off out of the pocket, you take away half of the field that maybe you had a full field read, that's now down to a half of a field. So there's just a lot of things like trickle down effect whenever the quarterback is not working through the progressions in the right manner. So knowing that you got an offensive line that can hopefully protect you, we'll see how it works out. You and I have been around long enough to see some of these revamped lines that don't always play out. Continuity really is important, but assuming if they can stay healthy through training camp, that'll be really big. But I think right now we have to make an assumption that we are going to see a much better version of the offensive line for the Bears, and then pairing that with the arrival of Ben Johnson. That's good news for Caleb Williams, which also means good news for Rome Odunze, who's going later in drafts because he didn't really have a good rookie season. DJ Moore had a down year, even though the target share and those things were there. You got Keenan Allen out of town now. So those two guys plus Cole Kmet, they could all end up being values in fantasy if Caleb can turn it around.
So that was my thought, again, as we're kind of getting some of our initial rankings together. And I'm not trying to put too much in the March ADP. I hate even bringing it up, but just trying to use it as a market, Dwayne. I'm not so sure people are going to be getting discounts on Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, because right now Caleb's sitting there as the QB 10 coming off the board, and Rome's still going inside the top 4 rounds, wide receiver 27 right now, next to guys like DK Metcalf and incoming rookie Tet McMillan. So again, I don't want to put too much blame on Caleb and Rome and just completely write off what they're capable of. But man, they really showed off some floors last year, and I'm just not entirely convinced that adding Ben Johnson and the improved offensive line is going to magically turn those guys around, because again, we're going to have to be using early round picks to find out. Just not so sure again that's going to be the wisest use of our fantasy resources. Still plenty of time to go in the off season. But man, Dwayne, if I just looked at this and said, okay, what do we think the Bears are going to do? Ben Johnson coming from a Lions offense that love to run the football. Now they're investing a ton in this offensive line. They're trying to take pressure off of Caleb Williams, and now they're the odds-on favorite, whatever that's worth, to draft Ashton Genty inside the top 10. I mean, if we do see Genty get there, I think we would be looking at a projection of the Bears around a top 5 most run-heavy offense in the NFL. So at that point, we would need Caleb and Rome and DJ Moore to be operating at near peak efficiency. And again, that's a lot to ask for guys that we just saw a very scary floor from.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would still be TBD on how often we would see them run. I mean, it depends on what they think about Caleb Williams. But I do think that they want to be more of at least if we're playing the Madden playbook game, it's a run balanced offense to a balanced, it's one of those balanced, playbooks. The thing about the ADP, I do agree with you, but that is also underdog. And so we know there's a pretty big disparity between what you're going to see on ESPN, what you're going to see on Yahoo, on a lot of these leagues. So it really does come down to what kind of leagues we're going to be talking about. Obviously, best ball, those are the first leagues that are really going to be getting drafted. So it is important to think about it. And he is, you think about Rome Odunze and some of these guys, to your point, they're not priced as low as you might think. But once we get to the home leagues, Like I bet you Rome Odunze doesn't go inside the top 36 wide receivers. Like just the way historically we've seen those leagues work. I don't think that's going to happen. And then the other part of it is we also know that wide receivers don't go as early in those drafts. So a lot of the running backs will trickle up and then that'll push the wide receivers down. My guess is once we get to home league draft time, we'll see a lot between now and then, a lot of news, a lot of different things can happen. My guess is Rome Odunze is probably round 7, 8 pick at most, maybe lower. Now, DJ Moore is different because he has had good years in the past, so he might end up still being in a range where you're not quite comfortable pulling the trigger on him. So, again, still a lot to shake out, but I do agree. Like looking at the early best ball stuff, you're right. People are not they're not shying away from these guys, and honestly, I think overall it's still smart. Like we've got a young player we really like. They had a good rookie profile. Marvin Harrison Jr. fits the same thing. It's like how far is too far to push them down? I think wide receiver 3 territory is fine for those guys. Again, I don't think you'll have to pay that price once we get to the home league drafts.
Rome price tag, I can see it. And also you subtract Keenan Allen and all of a sudden you're just centering the passing game around, DJ Moore and Rome. We again have extra reason to believe he could do more than what he did as a rookie. Caleb getting that top 10 QB treatment though is something, Dwayne. I mean, again, we're putting him ahead of guys like Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, Drake May. The guy can move, but we also saw last year we're not exactly getting, a 600-700, yard rusher who's going to be, threatening for 5-6 touchdowns a year. So again, we would need to see sky high efficiency through the air from Caleb, which he did flash at times last year. It can happen. I still do believe Caleb Williams will be a very good NFL quarterback, but man, that is a tough price to pay. I mean, why is Caleb getting that treatment? And we have CJ Stroud and T-Law, guys who have again also flashed a high ceiling, just going again twice as late in drafts. So plenty of time to see, how these things are going to unfold. Last point with the Bears though, Dwayne, because I mentioned again, Bears picking number 10 overall. I think I might've said 8. So my apologies. Genty could be going to them. Maybe he falls to Cowboys, whatever. They also have picks though at 39, 41, and 72 inside the top 75. Seems pretty likely they're going to add a running back at some point there, but why can't DeAndre Swift be something? I mean, I've never seen a running back almost get more disrespected. He breaks off some really cool runs sometimes and people just almost scoff and say like, oh yeah, about time. I mean, okay, we saw that horrendous. We saw that horrendous offensive line. We cannot talk about Caleb Williams without making an excuse about how bad the offensive line was. And DeAndre Swift just gets absolutely zero respect from working behind the same offensive line. I'm not saying he's a god out here. And yes, the Eagles should have moved on from him and taken Saquon Barkley, but DeAndre Swift is good. Is that okay to say?
I think he's fine. Look, he's been a guy that we've talked about for many years now. And when you look at the underlying data, he's got the things you like. He can work in the passing game, gives you explosive plays. He's got a lot of the stuff that that causes us to gravitate. But I think what happens is over time, people just get fatigued. And DeAndre Swift has ultimately never come through. He did for a stretch last year. It looked like he was really going to be a value. And to your point, the Bears' overall offense kind of just fell apart as well. They would have these, 2 or 3 game hot stretches, and they just couldn't quite keep things going. So I think people are they've got fatigue. And then I think the other component is it's such a deep running back class. Ranking running backs right now is really tricky. So I'm basically leaving a cushion on all my running back ranks that I've been working through. Obviously, the top guys are the top guys. We know nobody's getting drafted to take over Saquon's job, guys like that. But once you get past those players, you start talking about the James Connors of the world, the DeAndre Swifts, all those guys. We like them. They're talented. But man, they could very easily have a running back, especially in this class, because it's a deeper class. They could see competition added. So I've been keeping those guys a little bit lower than where I'll probably ultimately end up on the ones that don't have backfield competition. But at the same time, the ones that do have someone land on the team, they're going to move down. So I've kind of been splitting the middle on the ranks with those guys. So if I've got them around a wide receiver that I know probably has a role, we've got a weaker wide receiver class. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and rank the wide receivers ahead of these running backs in this range. And then we'll see what shakes out in the draft. But to answer the question, I do agree DeAndre Swift, still the same player that made us like him over the last several years. It's just that people are tired of it, and this is a deep draft class. So I think people are probably just assuming that his role is going to be taken away and there will be a new starter by the time the draft is over.
And I think people like to, kind of use that vision, whole just attribute when they kind of put down Swift, because you can take the still shots sometimes and say, oh my gosh, why didn't he run through this hole? Even though none of us have even been close to being in that situation ourselves. And I'm not trying to say Swift has plus vision out there or anything. We can go ahead and look through some of the advanced stats and probably conclude he doesn't. But again, this guy played with Ben Johnson in the year 2022 and worked as a top 15 running back in fantasy, even in a part-time role where Jamal Williams was scoring a touchdown every freaking other possession out there. So just wouldn't completely rule out the possibility that maybe Swift in a committee in a Chicago Bears offense we like could do some good things, because again, he has already done so both on this team and with Ben Johnson before. So vibes, again, feeling relatively high in Chicago, not so much in Houston, Dwain. You might say they have a problem. They have not spruced up the offensive line, though, in all seriousness. They have traded their left tackle, Laramie Tunzel. They traded Kenyon Green, their former first-round guard. Shaq Mason has also been released. So on the one hand, you would think that maybe you should be investing resources in your bad offensive line as opposed to selling half the group. On the other hand, they were already so bad, maybe whoever they're going to find to replace them can't be any worse. So where do you fall here, Dwain? Because again, this was a brutal unit last year. We saw CJ Stroud take 8 sacks in that season-ending loss against the Chiefs. And as much as I'm okay with them, again, moving on for some bad pieces, they're not really adding anyone else other than Laken Tomlinson. And man, hopefully you nail your rookie draft picks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the plan. You had an 83.9 PFF efficiency grade, which is essentially looking at pressures per snap sort of thing. They had 180 pressures in the league, but they ranked 22nd in PFF efficiency at 83.9. If you look at just their overall pass blocking grade, it was in a similar range. And then the run blocking grade really wasn't great either, Ian. It wasn't like, terrible, but it was towards the bottom half of the league as well. So yeah, it was just an area where they struggled both in the pass and in the run game last season. So it is weird to see them move on from all these guys. But to your point, maybe that is their thought, that all of these players underperformed versus their expectations, and they were just tired of it and they want to move on from them. So I do think it'll be important for them to address this position in the draft. If you look at their lineup right now, I mean, obviously it's got several new starters in it. On the left side, you've got Titus Howard, who is a player that, he can be decent. Then you've got Tomlinson. Did you say Tomlinson they're releasing?
No, they brought in Tomlinson. They signed him.
Okay, yeah. Tomlinson was who they signed. Yeah, so Tomlinson right now, I mean, if you look at last year, PFF pass block grade, 34th out of 73 qualifying guards, so kind of a middle-of-the-road guy. Then you had Jarrett Patterson, who was their 6th-round pick in 2023. He's going to play center. His PFF pass block grade was 7th out of 39 last season, so not bad on his part. And then you also had their 2nd-round pick from 2023, which is Juice Scruggs. He was 25th out of 39. He played center last year, moving to guard. So that'll be another guy that they're going to count on more. So they do have, like with Scruggs, they do have a guy that they spent some capital on. Howard was a guy, that was thought of as being a good tackle in the league for a while, but obviously they're going to have to do some work outside of that. I am with you though. Like, seeing what happened with CJ Stroud, we know that he likes to buy time in the pocket. Ultimately, he wants to make the big throw down the field, which is what you want from your quarterbacks. I know it's tougher in this day and age with the way that the deep safeties work and all the disguise coverage and different things like that. It makes it harder on the quarterbacks to do it, but that still is CJ Stroud's calling card, is that ability just to hold on the ball an extra beat, hit that big play down the field, whether it's to, it won't be Tank Dell for the most part this year, but we'll just go with Nico Collins for now. Christian Kirk's the other guy that they've added. He's got a couple of weapons that can do it, but can the offensive line give him the time? That's obviously going to be a challenge.
Just kind of curious overall organizational moves out of Houston over this last, year and a half. We have Bobby Slowick in his first year, get a lot out of CJ Stroud, was even getting some head coaching calls after, again, everything they managed to achieve in year one, and then kind of gets thrown on the bus. He's a scapegoat. He's the reason why Stroud, regressed and couldn't get going. But I guess it was also the offensive line that was the problem. Now we're also letting Stephon Diggs apparently walk, bringing in Christian Kirk. They gave Joe Mixon, a bunch of money that people were kind of surprised about as well. So just again, Dwain, like if we're looking at like Houston from the end of last year to where they stand right now, I'm not so sure that simply adding Christian Kirk and subtracting offensive linemen is what we would have hoped to have seen by this point. So they did get plenty of draft capital and they saved some money and everything like that. So 4 picks inside the top 90, maybe they can go ahead and fix the group there. But, when you got CJ Stroud in a rookie contract, I don't love the whole like, oh yeah, Laramie Tunzel was going to want this big contract in a couple years anyway, so we had to get rid of him. I don't know, man. Maybe just pay that guy his dollar right now, live with the false starts he's going to have, and try to keep, again, your franchise quarterback better protected. So just, again, it's a situation where Stroud, we legit were ranking him right there with Joe Burrow last year, and he finished as the QB 28 in fantasy land. I mean, just based on what we've seen, Dwain, how confident are you in a bounce back?
I mean, I'm not that confident, but at least he has shown it. He's still a young player. Yeah. And you asked earlier, like Caleb Williams, like how do people rank Caleb Williams ahead of, CJ Stroud? I mean, at least CJ Stroud, we have seen one good season. Now I will say with Caleb, I know you kind of weren't that impressed by his rushing numbers, but I mean, 489, that's still pretty good. If you're going to rush for 500 yards, you're most likely not going to score 0 rushing touchdowns. So I would expect regression for Caleb to really help him out in that department this year. His biggest question though is, can he turn into a passer that can really live on a down-to-down scenario? I mean, with CJ Stroud, we at least know that he can do that. He can get the ball to his weapons. So I think people are mostly betting on ceiling with Caleb, which is if everything works out, he gets 500 rushing yards and he scores 5 rushing touchdowns instead of 0, and now Ben Johnson takes his passing game to the next level. I could see how people might think that's a better ceiling than CJ Stroud, who's not really going to run the ball that often, loses these offensive linemen, that sort of thing. So I don't have a ton of confidence necessarily in either one of these players. I still like them though, Ian, because they are young. They both want to make the big play down the field. And those are the things that I think we still want, even though it may go wrong. If you're thinking ceiling with your quarterback picks, remember guys, there's always going to be a quarterback on the waiver wire that no one expected. That's just going to give you that quarterback 10 to 14 range, just give you an average starter that you can get into your lineup. You're almost going to be able to find that every single season. So I don't blame people for wanting to, shoot for more ceiling with their quarterbacks. But I think you do ask a good question. Like, is there a reason you should prefer Caleb over CJ Stroud? It probably just is what you saw from a rushing standpoint last year.
That's fair. And we also got to consider, I mean, in Houston, Dwain, hey, if you enter a tough situation, 2 minutes left in the game, big third down, you got Dalton Schultz on the field, or you can try to get the football too. All right.
How did you take this long to get here? I've been waiting. I guess I should have teed you up sooner.
We got here. Hey, it's
I was trying to be nice to the Schultz family. I feel like you probably got hate mail from the Schultz family last year. I get hate mail from Alan Lazard's family. Yours is from Dalton Schultz.
Yes, and it probably is deserved, but we will watch the film and get better as always. Guys, still plenty of free agents out there. And I wanted to talk about some of the, potential landing spots we could see some of the bigger name guys out there hopefully end up with. First, a quick word to our friends over at New Era. Get my Raiders cap on. Love me some New Era. And you guys can watch the next generation of football stars rise with New Era cap. Current top prospects like Cam Ward trust the 2025 Draft Combine Collection to deliver peak comfort and performance when every rep counts. As they chase their NFL dreams, New Era cap is there every step of the way. Gear up for greatness with New Era cap, the official outfitter of the NFL Draft Combine. All right, Dwain, again, we are through 3 days of free agency, yet there are still a handful of big names, really at quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, who seemingly will find new homes at some point, but that point has not been reached just yet. So looking at the quarterback position, we have Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Joe Flacco, and Carson Wentz sitting there with basically 3 chairs left, to go around. We got the Giants, we got the Titans, and we got the Steelers still looking for their QB. Now you can also add the Browns there. Apparently Kenny Pickett and Deshaun Watson is not their idea of a complete quarterback room. Who would have thought? But seems like the first domino that needs to fall is Aaron Rodgers. We're hearing reports now that he is picking between the Giants and the Steelers. So Rodgers, obviously someone who never, really takes his time with things, always known for he does quick decision making, likes to leave drama out of it. So hopefully we'll get a decision there soon with Aaron, Dwain. But man, do you see any of these guys exactly, needle moving these situations? Because on the one hand, like, you could do worse than Rodgers or Russell Wilson, but on the other hand, like, man, here we are in March and we're like hoping Malik Neighbors can get Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson. Not great.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking at the Steelers and you're trying to feed 2 weapons in George Pickens and DK Metcalf, like, you're really hoping for Aaron Rodgers. Like, and then the second place is in the order here. You're getting Russell Wilson because we know the team also wants to reduce. They don't want a lot of turnovers. They're trying to win games. Obviously, as fantasy managers, we would just take Jameis. Could you imagine Jameis Winston playing with DK Metcalf and George Pickens? Oh my God, it would be like Christmas every single Sunday. But we know Mike Tomlin and his MO. Like, yeah, I mean, you could get hype thinking about that. Hartitz is probably going to go make some videos after this of Jameis Winston, and he's going to mix them in with, some George Pickens, DK Metcalf cut ups. But
that's a good idea.
Yeah, look at you. You know how you're going to spend your evening now. You're welcome. But outside of Aaron Rodgers, like, I start to get worried. Like, even Russell Wilson at this point, like, it would be fine. But Aaron Rodgers, and I know last year he didn't really do it, but I could sell myself on a scenario where it could work out with DK Metcalf as well as with George Pickens. When I look at Wilson's, it's like, well, he might be able to support one of them. Jameis, obviously, we know they're not going to do that. Joe Flacco, I mean, honestly, Joe Flacco's kind of in the same bucket as Jameis Winston. Every time he gets on the field, he seems to do okay. But we know in reality the teams aren't going to want to get those players as starters. I see Winston and Flacco more likely landing on the teams that know they want to draft a quarterback and play them, and maybe letting them sit on the bench behind the young quarterback. So I do think that Aaron Rodgers, if he goes to the Steelers, that moves the needle. Doesn't move the needle. It keeps the needle in place. It keeps it from being a situation where we're suddenly going from ranking DK Metcalf as a wide receiver 3 to him falling down to the bottom of wide receiver 3 status. That would probably put George Pickens lower in wide receiver 4 status if you didn't get Aaron Rodgers. So I think you and I are probably both kind of anticipating that the Steelers do sign one of those two guys. And if they didn't, we would have to change our ranks. As far as Malik Neighbors goes, I would prefer Aaron Rodgers, but I think he's the only game in town, really. So I feel like he can probably survive with either one of the quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers would be my preferred of the two. Again, I think that Malik Neighbors, would have the ceiling of being, the wide receiver 1 overall, really with either of them. But I would feel better about Aaron Rodgers.
Can we just run it back? Drew Lock every week. You'll face the Colts every couple years. Why can't we live on that?
Yeah, well, hey, I look. I don't want to be the guy to dash your dreams. So I'll just say, yes, we can live with it, Ian.
Good man. Good man. Also in the news, again, we have Russell Wilson apparently visiting the Browns here within the next 24 hours. And then the Giants, again, the rumorville is basically saying that he is waiting for Aaron Rodgers' decision before he gets going. And then also sounds like, again, there could be some Carson Wentz steam to the Titans. I'm so sorry, Titans fans. And then also Joe Flacco looks like the backup plan all around. So again, still have some musical chairs to go around at quarterback. I'm just going to be intrigued if we do see one of these teams kind of left standing, because I mean, again, Pittsburgh, if they did go ahead and trade for Metcalf, they've added Darius Slay and some other, big name players this offseason cycle, really would be, hilarious to everyone other than Steelers fans if they do kind of get left holding a bag without an actual quarterback. But we will see what happens there. Similar to quarterback though, Dwain, we do still have some bigger name running backs. Now, you mentioned before, this is a very deep draft, so it's tough to get too excited about. Honestly, any of these players, regardless of where they land, because we're always going to have the second statement of, well, we'll see what they do in the draft. But Rico Dowdle, J.K. Dobbins, Nick Chubb, and even a recently released Miles Sanders, all on the open market. Out of this group, is there anyone who you do think could maybe still have the chance to go ahead, find a new job, and actually command a featured role? Or at this point, should we probably take the reality that they haven't been signed yet as a pretty good sign that, probably looking at more of a committee job?
Probably more of a committee job. And I mean, they would have to run really pure, right? As far as their landing spot and what happened in the draft. You mentioned that. We don't have to keep caveating that every single time. But J.K. Dobbins is the name that sticks out to me here. When you look at him, because he did it last year. I mean, yards after contact, 3.0, just above the league average of 2.9. He averaged 4.6 yards per carry, 19% missed tackles forced per attempt, also slightly above the league average of 17%. And the big thing was the explosive rushing attempts. 14% of his carries went for 10 plus yards. The league average is 9.5%. So Dobbins was well above that. I get it. He didn't have the ultimate long gear on that one play last year to get it all the way into the end zone. But overall, as a guy breaking 10 plus yards, and that's mostly what the coaching staffs are going to care about, because most of the time that's an instant first down. Right? Unless you're like on second down and 14. I mean, a 10 plus yard carry is an automatic first down in most situations, and coaches really like that. So Dobbins is the one of the group that I think showed the most last year. Rico Dowdle also was like low key good, but I think most teams probably look at him kind of the way we did as fantasy managers last year, which is okay, fine. Like, give him the volume, it'll work. But this is a journeyman guy, so I don't think a lot of teams are going to want to put him in a situation to get a lot of the carries. Nick Chubb, it's just hard to say, man. Like, obviously, he's been through multiple brutal injuries over the course of his career, college and pro, and it's just a situation where he did not look anything like what he looked before. last year. We talked about Javonte Williams on yesterday's show, how he was 2 years removed from a similar type of injury, and even in year 2 didn't look good. Nick Chubb is older than Javonte Williams. So as much as it pains me to say it, because Nick Chubb is one of my favorite running backs of all time, just love watching Nick Chubb play some football. It's a situation where I think you just kind of got to assume that he's not going to be the same, and he has to prove to us otherwise. So my guess is NFL teams are also treating it that same way. Probably going to take a situation where he lands somewhere, outperforms, and maybe looks better. Now, here's the thing. I would never count Nick Chubb out. Like, the dude is a workout phenom. He's going to do everything he can to have his body ready to play some football this season. So it's a never say never kind of situation. But if you're a betting man, I think you got to lean towards the latest data point because of his age. If he was 23 or something, we'd be leaning towards, okay, Nick Chubb, he's a freak. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take a risk on him. I think right now, though, we've got to lean towards the side of probably not the same back at this point.
Bottom 2 in terms of yards per carry, and I believe dead last in an explosive rate last year. So really wasn't a good, comeback for Nick Chubb. I mean, I should say it was a great comeback for him to even get back on the field, but obviously couldn't make much with that work when he was able to. So returning to Cleveland would just be kind of cool. You got Myles Garrett there. I know David Njoku has been going on social media trying to get the guys to, bring Chubb back, form that 1-2 punch with Jerome Ford again, but certainly would be on a low dollar amount. Really tough to believe that, again, we're going to see better days ahead for Chubb, but certainly we'll be rooting for him if that goes on. Finally, Dwain, there are still some big name wide receivers out there. Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, if he's still, allowed to play for an NFL team, might have burnt those bridges, even Mike Williams as well. So a lot of teams that, again, we would still like to see add wide receivers. The Patriots so far have only added your favorite guy, Dwain, Mac Hollins, who, has anyone heard he doesn't like soup or shoes? Or what a quirky guy. Oh my goodness. Cowboys, Jets, Browns, Titans, Packers, Seahawks, and Panthers. Some other examples of teams that, again, thought might be in the wide receiver rat race, but so far haven't done much of anything. So we have age here. We have some guys coming off of injuries, but really, Dwain, just between those big 5, Diggs, Allen, Cooper, Deontay, and Mike, who would you be most willing to maybe put a chip on where they could still continue to produce in the year 2025?
I think it's Amari for me. Like you said, all these guys have challenges who've got age. Amari was dealing with injuries last season, changed teams, so I just feel like he's the guy of these. Again, I don't want to say that's the only guy definitively, but if I had to choose, I do think it's Amari. He can also still play outside. Keenan, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, like those guys can all play from the slot. But to your point, Diggs is still coming off the injury. He's also, he's a locker room potential issue. Not like I've been in these locker rooms and seen what Stephon Diggs is doing. But after multiple teams reporting this stuff, there's some things that teams may want to stay away from there. So we'll see what ultimately happens with him. But there are, to your point, Ian, there's several places. Like, this is not a strong wide receiver class as far as the draft goes. There are some guys we really like. The best wide receiver in the class is going to probably play cornerback, right? And then we've got Ted McMillan, who's also a really good prospect, but the depth is not near as good as what we have at running back. And we do have these teams still sitting there with all this money. Like, we've got the Patriots, $93 million effective cap space per over the cap. What they do is they project forward, hey, having to have the 52-man roster, the rookies they still have to sign. So that's the top number. You got the Chargers sitting there with $78 million. All they have is Ladd McConkey on the team. I'm sorry, Will Disley. And then you've got, you got the Seahawks. They've gotten rid of DK Metcalf. They cut Tyler Lockett. JSN can't be the only player that you're running out there. Jake Bobo can't be your wide receiver too. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. They've got $56.7 million in effective cap space. So I do think we'll start to see these names go. My guess is some teams have already been calling on them, and the wide receivers probably had an asking price that the teams are allowing to cool because none of them have signed. So like the price and demand you got that kind of market thing working itself out right now. And I think it'll eventually break, though, probably when you're on the golf course and you're going to need to immediately drive home and write up a quick recap of where Stephon Diggs landed.
Tends to be how things work. But I will say, please, Patriots, just spend some money, trade some draft picks. Chris Olave's out there, T. Higgins out there. Even if you don't want one of these old geezers, make some sort of moves. We cannot be wasting now Drake May's rookie contract with a bunch of mid out there. But that's gonna do it for Dwain and myself on the Fantasy Life Show presented by DraftKings. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll be back tomorrow to help wrap up free agency and hopefully break down some big moves that will happen between now and then. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.